I would just like to start by saying this. You know, of course we're going to talk about the riots and the terrible events of the last few days, but this started a week ago with the terrible murder of 3 little girls, BB King, Elsie Stancombe, Alice De Silva Aguirre, and 2 children have come out of hospital. 5 children are still in hospital, 2 adults still recovering. You know, let us not forget those terrible incidents and send our very best wishes to those children and their families who are dealing with the terrible aftermath of that killing.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ed, because I think people might have forgotten this. What's this all about? This summer of discontent, these riots, this burning down of libraries, for God's sake, and citizens' advice bureaus. Libraries where people go for repose and sanctuary, and it's also home of a food bank.
For heaven's sake, not this kind of ignorant horror.
But I think some people genuinely who've taken part in these demonstrations are peaceful and peace-loving, and they've got an issue about the rapid rise of immigration and the impacts on their communities. But overall, it is shameful. And I think the government, apart from saying they're going to get to grips with the ringleaders, they've got to sort these social media out, because a lot of this is being organised on social media, and Ofcom, they need tougher powers, because it's poisonous lies being spread on social media, and nothing seems to be being done about it.
Those little souls injured and killed are not being served by any of this.
But the mother said that, didn't she? One of the mums said that. No, please don't do this in our name.
It must be very upsetting for the families and for the community of Southport, which really came together in the aftermath of it, for this to be hijacked by people lying on sunbeds in Cyprus, directing the violence. And
we're referring to some of the images on the front page.
Based on lies, based on a completely inaccurate account of what happened in Southport. And as Andrew said, we have a multiple challenge here, or the Prime Minister and the government does, dealing with the immediate violence, but also getting to grips once and for all with this social media problem, which no one really knows how to tackle.
I mean, 17-year-old Axel Rudakabana has been charged with 3 murders, these attempted murders, born in Cardiff.
Yeah.
And we have pictures over the weekend of rioters trying to burn down hotels in which there are asylum seekers, because over the last week, a whole series of people have been spreading lies that it was a migrant asylum seeker who came over on the boats who committed these acts, and therefore they've got to save our children. Yeah. But save our children? I mean, they're trying to burn people down.
Yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned, didn't you, that being spread, you know, Tommy Robinson was supposed to be referring to, who's pictured on the front page of the Mail, isn't he? Lying in Corfu on his holiday.
Cyprus, I think it...
Cyprus, I apologise, Cyprus. And, you know, and in his tweet, which I think we've got, he says, the whole country is angry, north, south, east and west. When will politicians listen? Specifically trying to say that the country is up in arms.
Showing moving photos of people burning down a hotel.
We can see. Already Malaysia has said to the people, don't come here because it's a risk. It's horrific that this is the image that's been perpetrated by people like that who you feel want this to happen.
Yes, I mean, there are a mixture of people. Andrew's right. I think there are some people who are going onto the streets foolishly, in my view, because they have legitimate concerns, and in some of these communities that have been very left behind over many, many years, with crumbling public services, schools, housing and so forth. But then there are these very wealthy digital warriors here and abroad, fomenting these lies and these conspiracy theories, which these people are spreading, in some cases believing, but using as a pretext, basically just to have a punch-up. There's a lot of alcohol involved, a lot of cocaine involved, and I think once we see some of these people being brought before the courts, bursting into tears, as generally happens when they come off their high and get 5 years in jail, that will start to cool things down.
And the attacks on the police, I'm saying the attacks on the police are shameful as well. The police who protect us, the police who were heroic in Southport as well, and one police officer beaten unconscious. Beaten unconscious.
Amazing. Zoa Sultana, I mean, it's shocking, isn't it? Frightening to see these scenes. I don't know, have you seen these kind of incidents in Coventry over the weekend?
Well, I've been talking to my dad, who reminded me that when he was growing up in the 70s and 80s, this is the racist, far-right, fascist violence that they had to deal with growing up, and now we are seeing violence descend upon towns and cities across the country. And we need to call this racist and we need to call it Islamophobic, because if we don't, we fail to really address what's going on. And language is really important. I noticed that the Daily Telegraph were calling it a counter-protest by Muslims. No, you have one side that is burning down citizens' advice bureaus, libraries, targeting mosques, attacking black and brown people who are walking in their communities, targeting women who are wearing the hijab, and you have others who are defending their communities and standing up when they are finding no other help. So we really need to be quite clear about what's going on. And I have to say that it shouldn't be a surprise that this has happened. There is decades of work by the right-wing press and by politicians who have fanned the flames of this hate. When we look at the role that media outlets like GB News has played, that the Daily Mail has played.
Well, hang on, what has my newspaper done? What has my newspaper
done? So if we look at the front pages of the Daily Mail, and if we look at the language that has been used by outlets like the Daily Mail, and as well as
Can you give me an example? Can you give me an example?
I can give you a number of examples.
Come on, give me one now.
The language around refugees
let's have one now.
and Muslims
let's have one now.
Dehumanising. So what I'm saying is there are politicians.
Do you have an example?
There are politicians and there are journalists who have played an active role in fanning the flames of hate and division, and we are seeing that play out.
Just pause for a second, because you did specifically mention the Daily Mail.
Could you tell me what specifically?
Is the specific thing?
I can list a number of headlines to Andrew after the show, because I think this has taken up a lot of time. But what I would say is that media outlets and journalists, as well as politicians, we had a former Home Secretary who referred to refugees as an invasion. We've had Nigel Farage, also on GB News, saying that British Muslims don't have the same values, don't share British values. So when we look at the complicity, we have to be, there's a lot of mirrors that people need to be looking into. And I think also the role that ITV has also played in terms of inviting Nigel Farage, allowing him to rehabilitate his image on I'm a Celeb, and then espousing the views that they
He was standing in election and is now a member of Parliament.
I agree.
And as part of election coverage, you do give people the opportunity.
But if we're talking about where this has come from, I would say that, the economic system, which has allowed inequality to exacerbate in this country, has brought down living standards. Our communities have faced the brunt of Tory austerity. And what has happened on the right-wing side of politics, in the media and in politics, is that migrants, Muslims and trans people have been blamed for people not being able to access council housing, not being able to get NHS appointments, not being able to find school places for their kids. Rather than saying this is the result of political decisions made by consecutive governments, people have blamed and scapegoated minorities.
We now have a Labour government, though, don't we?
That is the role of the media, and that is the role of politicians.
Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper and Rishi Sunak over the weekend have all said that...
have they called it Islamophobic and racist?
Why is that language important to you?
Because these aren't trivial matters.
They've called it racist. Have they called it racist?
These are not trivial matters. We have to...
No, I know. No, I'm sorry. We do have to ask you questions as well.
Absolutely.
So
if you want to, you can answer them.
I'm going to wait for Kate to finish her question, if that's...
If you want to answer the questions, you can, but you don't have to.
So why is it important to you to use that specific word, Islamophobic? It's been called racist, it's been called thuggery. I think that's important because we are speaking to the Home Secretary and other politicians this morning. Why does that matter to you to use the word Islamophobic?
In Stockport, a mosque was targeted, bricks were thrown out. The people who were in the mosque at that time, who were basically locked down in that mosque, said that they feared for their life.
But
they weren't able to get out. I'm just finishing the question.
I
did ask specifically about the word,
if that's okay?
Yeah.
I would also say that the role of the Labour Party, historically through New Labour, the controls on immigration, mugs, and also your article in The Guardian where you said the problem with Labour is that they have accepted too many Eastern European migrants. We have to look at all of this historically over at least 2-3 decades when we look at the role.
I was totally right in that article.
So the discussion around immigration, you don't see that playing a role in what we're seeing descend across the country. You don't think there's any complicity in that at all?
I think if you fail to control and manage immigration properly, then things go wrong.
So the language that protesters...
So you have to control and manage immigration?
Rather than far-right mobs and
you believe in controlling and managing it?
The language that they're using are stop the boats. They are telling people like me to go home. If we look at the language used by politicians and the language used by these people in these streets, you will see a direct correlation.
But you've moved from attacking Andrew to attacking me, so let me have a go.
The question that Kate asked me about language, if that's okay.
What you can't do is just spray out attacks on all of us and then not have any comeback. You didn't answer Andrew's question.
No, she didn't.
You attacked me. I wrote an article in which I said it was important to control and manage migration. You agree with that?
what I'm saying is, when we're talking about migration...
I'm asking you a question. You've got to answer it.
I am answering it.
Do you agree in controlling and managing migration?
I think we need to talk about migration in a way that humanises people who have to migrate.
Of course.
And the levels of the debate, the levels it has stooped, has meant that people are setting fire to hotels that are housing asylum seekers.
But do you agree in controlling and managing it?
When we look at the impact of language used, we need to look at how it affects people in our communities and in our streets. In Tamworth, a hotel housing asylum seekers has been set alight. That has happened also in the north. And I think we need to really be careful about the language we use. And just going back to Kate's question...
I'm asking you a really simple question. Do you think it's important for governments to control and manage migration?
I think having an immigration policy which is fair, which recognises that we need migration to staff our NHS, to staff our social care crisis with an ageing population, I think we need to have really responsible language. And just answering Kate's question...
I don't know. Can
I answer Kate's question?
Well, you can do, but you haven't answered any questions so far.
So Kate's question about naming it as Islamophobic is really important because that allows us to shape our response. If we're not identifying what is happening, the language that is being used, and what this is about, we're not going to be able to address this fundamentally.
It's clearly anti-Muslim riots. Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper have both been condemning that for its racism. They've said the attacks on the mosques are terrible. I don't know whether they used the word Islamophobia.
They didn't.
They've certainly said racism. We all agree about that. But I'm just kind of, asking you, do you think it's important to control and manage immigration?
I think it's really important to reassure communities that are most affected
of
by the violence that we're seeing. And I have to ask, why is there such controversy around calling it Islamophobic when we know Muslim communities are being targeted, we know the language that is being used? Why is it so hard to use that word? That is my question. I struggle to understand what is going on there.
I don't really understand.
And they're horrific scenes. I suppose you're saying that this has come from language that's been used inappropriately by politicians.
And policy as well.
Yeah, and policy. There are other people that say that... There are other people that would argue that some of this anger has come from not managing migration.
Right.
Not necessarily my view, but they would suggest that's the case. Do you also accept that?
What I would say is that there are people who are going to these towns and cities for a variety of reasons, but what we are seeing with citizens' advice bureaus being burnt down, what we're seeing with libraries being burnt down, mosques attacked, completely show people's true colours. And to legitimise it by saying there are legitimate concerns around migration means that the people that are facing the brunt of these attacks, we are giving them cover and we are legitimising it.
Can I just give Ben a chance to defend the government?
Yeah, I think that's a great shame because I think amidst all of that, there were some very important points, which is brown and black people in this country at the moment feel really scared.
Yeah.
And that's a really important point to make. Sarah's absolutely right. We have a problem in this country with Islamophobia. It's peddled by some, like Tommy Robinson, you've already described, and others on the far right, some politicians who should know better. But the rest of it was lost, as far as I was concerned.
But then it's also peddled by organisations like the Henry Jackson Society, and you are on the advisory council
let me
of that
finish one sentence.
Those two very important points, in my view, were lost in the way that Zara presented them in the rest of that.
Why were they lost, do you think?
Well, because I think she wasn't answering your questions. She was making unreasonable points about, the public's legitimate concern about illegal migration. And the need for us to make sure that we have public services in this country and housing and the capacity to integrate all these people. The people who are not integrating, by the way, are not the immigrants. They're the far right. There are people wearing Nazi swastikas blazoned on their skins, doing Nazi salutes. These are the people who are not integrating into our society. We have in Britain, in my view, one of the most successful multicultural societies in the world. You go anywhere else in Europe, you ask people in France, in Germany, ethnic minorities there, what their model is for a successful multicultural democracy. It's the United Kingdom.
But looking at the screens at the moment...
Yeah.
It's very frightening
for
the communities that you're talking about.
I'm scared to go out. I've got family and friends who are thinking about how they should travel, how they shouldn't go out, people who aren't going to the mosque to pray. This is the real-life impact.
It's also frightening for people who don't look like you. This is frightening generally. This feels like a ferment of anger and rioting, which we have to be really responsible about talking about.
Can I say here, in Hartlepool, the police say a number of the people who were involved in the demonstrations were peaceful They were local, they were not far right, they were not agitators, they were not actors, but they feel a sense that they've been overlooked, that they feel almost strangers in their community. And we have to acknowledge that, and we shouldn't attack people for feeling like that.
But we
and that is
attack the behaviour, though,
of course, the
on any
behaviour
level
is
in this
shameful.
situation.
The violence is unacceptable. But for people
Andrew,
to feel
this
marginalised
weekend-
in their own community, that is a factor.
But this weekend, people joining these inverted commas protests, which are actually riots this weekend, seeing them on the TV and joining in, they're not joining in because they want to make a legitimate protest about the last 20 years of policy. They are joining in something which is violent, criminal, anti-Muslim, it's frightening, scary, as Zara said. They're trying to burn down hotels. It's totally shocking.
It is racist thuggery, it's Islamophobic thuggery, it's anti-Muslim thuggery. It's unacceptable on our streets. But I say again, we've got to...
hotels where asylum seekers are being held, but we're talking about people, aren't we?
Exactly.
Men, women, probably children.
But we've got to get to grips with this social media, which is fueling this. It's fueling it, and they get away with murder, and that's what's going to happen. There will be a murder.
Do you think the police response has been tough enough?
People have seen the lack of police turning up in places. There's a confidence issue around policing, and I think increasing police powers isn't the response. There are political solutions to this when we look at the fact that people feel like they haven't got a sense of community anymore. They've seen their high streets completely decimated. They can't get a council house. They see the failures of the NHS. And
do you think the police response should have been tougher?
I feel that people need to be confident that when this happens in their communities, that the police will turn up. And as a constituency MP, you hear so many anecdotes of things happening and people not having faith in the police to come, whether it's their car being burgled, whether it's their phone being stolen, whether they've been attacked.
So we need more police.
And this feeds into what we're seeing, where people are obviously going to places looking for a bit of a fight, a bit of a scrap, and unfortunately also setting things alight, knowing that the police response probably isn't going to be as strong as it should be, given that this has now been running for 5 days.
So we need a stronger police response.
I am saying, Ed, that police powers, increasing those, is not the answer.
So you want a stronger police response, but not more police powers.
No,
how would you have a stronger police response?
It's not a silver bullet. It's not.
I'm just asking a question.
It's not a silver bullet.
What does a stronger police response mean then?
When we're seeing the violence, we need... You shouldn't have a situation where people can set a hotel on fire.
Sure.
How is that being allowed to continue? Two hotels have now been set alight. That should not happen. There should be enough police to deal with the situation that is unfolding in these situations. But I think politicians often jump to quick responses in terms of increasing police powers, looking at surveillance. And what I'm saying is the long-term political solution to stop the far right from growing, from seeing more of this, is addressing economic inequality, structural racism, and that's how we move forward. Just looking at policing is not going to answer
So how would you address that? Because, you know, we have an emergency at the moment, but...
Absolutely.
Beyond controlling this and making people feel safer in the short term, those things have got to be addressed.
Absolutely, and that requires investment. That requires investing in our NHS, it requires investing in our communities, and a politics that humanises refugees, that doesn't scapegoat Muslims, that doesn't attack the most vulnerable in our society. And like the point that I was making earlier, for far too long, that is what has happened. We've allowed that to be on our front pages.
But those things are really important.
What media pundits talk about.
But those things are important, but they're not going to stop far-right protests. How do you stop far-right racist...
Long-term.
I know, but changing the language about migration or improving our NHS is not going to stop far-right protesters who are racist. How do you stop them?
In the moment now.
What, or now and in the coming months?
I think
you arrest them and lock them up.
Well, I think long-term...
That's kind of what I'm asking. I mean...
Yeah, exactly. So you have to answer that economic question, because if you don't provide for people and if you don't build up living standards, history shows us that the far right exploits that economic situation and it will carry on. And unless we use political solutions to do that...
lock them up and...
Well, I think you'll see that happening. There have already been scores of arrests. The courts are going to be sitting 24 hours. You'll see there have already been scores of arrests. We'll be beginning to see photographs now and films of people, as I said earlier, going to jail for a number of years and looking very upset about it, having come off their cocaine-fuelled high. And I think that will send out a message about how the state's reacting to this.
And, you know, if this was France or Germany, the police would use hose pipes on these protesters.
So that's one of the things that's been raised.
You can do it in Northern Ireland. That's part of the United Kingdom.
But in Northern Ireland, they don't do it.
But they can.
But they choose not to because they don't think it works.
Well, but they use it in France and Germany very successfully. And it's
why
don't we consider it?
One of the arguments against it is that, you know, you just drive people out into a mess.
And also the police aren't asking for it. The police made quite clear last night that they have adequate resources, they have adequate powers, they're doing their job, they should be supported to get on with it.
The problem is, though, is that you see the scene of those police officers backed against the wall, the injuries you talking about being knocked unconscious, and the visible sign of a water cannon. That feels like a strong message.
This is a really interesting thing, though, isn't it? Because, of course, you know, back in 2011, the last time we had August riots on this scale, in that case, provoked by the killing by police of Mark Duggan at the beginning of August, riots across in London, but across the country, 4,000 plus people were arrested very quickly and charged, so that you had that kind of response. But, of course, back then, you didn't have social media pictures being propagated the way we now see, and it is different, isn't it? The way social media can tell people, here's what's happening, show the pictures, it's a different kind of copycat riot we have these days because of the way in which social media can be used. And it's being used in a pretty nasty way.
And I'm sure you'll be seeing a response from the government on the Digital Online Safety Act, which has not been brought into force yet. It needs to be brought into force very quickly. It should perhaps be toughened up as well. But the very clear message needs to go out to these digital platforms. You cannot foment violence and rioting and anarchy on our streets.
We showed that tweet from Tommy Robinson last week when he was spreading misinformation about migrants. The global owner of Twitter X, Elon Musk, was responding in a supportive way to his tweets.
The billionaire. I mean, they're making... And these social media are making money out of this.
Tommy Robinson's been allowed back onto Twitter because of that change. It is shocking, isn't it, what's happening with social media?
Absolutely. In terms of what I've received, Parliament's authorities told me in the last Parliament that I'd received the most abuse of any MP online and that they really struggle to report things and get things taken down on Twitter ever since Elon Musk took over. So when we look at how that is also fanning the flames, I think it is a very concerning area. And we need to be able to deal with how fast disinformation disseminates, and there isn't a quick solution to that either.
Of course, back in 2011, Parliament was recalled.
Please don't repeat the specific things, but are we talking racist abuse, if you were there?
Extremely racist, death threats, rape threats. You know, the language that we see on the streets of the country at the moment, I've been receiving in my inbox, in my letters, on social media, and it also always correlates whenever I speak up around racism, around migrants' rights, and also the rights and the freedom of Palestinian people as well.
2011, Parliament was recalled in August when the riots were happening, and you've called for Parliament to be recalled this week. What difference could Parliament coming back make?
I think it provides reassurance to people who are frightened, who have seen this violence on their screens, on their phones for days now. It shows that politicians are listening. And also, I think it's really important that we see what the government is doing. You know, the government has rightly provided funding to provide security for mosques. What else are we doing to reassure communities that this is not going to continue and that we will never see violence like this on our streets again? It's really important that we show that leadership. And, you know, unless Parliament's sitting, unless we're discussing this and standing up for our constituents, I think people see that as politicians not perhaps taking it as seriously as they should.
Is there a case for it?
My answer to a question like this is, what would it achieve? I'm not sure. I mean, Keir Starmer is someone who is very anti-performative politics, and I think recalling Parliament can be the right thing to do in certain circumstances. On the other hand, it's exactly the kind of attention that some of these people want. So I'm not sure that there's a strong argument at this stage for a recall. I mean, I saw Priti Patel, one of the Conservative leadership candidates, who called for the recall of Parliament so politicians could condemn the violence. Politicians can condemn the violence anyway, and they all should, and they have been, or most of them Not all of them, shamefully, but
Zara
most of them have
says
been.
that, that communities want to know
Yes,
that they
but
are uppermost in the minds of the Prime Minister.
And I think the fact that, Keir made a statement yesterday, Cobra's meeting today, there'll be very clear actions coming out of that will be presented to the public. I think the government is capable of giving the reassurance to communities that those communities need without Parliament being recalled. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, depending on what happens over the next few days. But I'm not sure that kind of performative politics. We've had too much of that over the last few years, where politicians think we've got to do something. Let's recall Parliament. Let's do X. And actually, what matters is results and results on the ground.
And is that what the Cobra meeting will be about today?
Well, so-
And I mean, you've been in many. Does that give a different kind of focus?
It's one of those things that in our news headlines, Ben just said it as well, the Cobra meeting. It makes you think there's some kind of, some twisting snake.
It feels a bit James Bond.
It's
I always
Cabinet
think,
Office
Cobra.
something.
Yeah.
It's Cabinet Office Briefing Room A.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's where the meeting occurs. But that meeting room is where you can have a very secure environment in which the security services can come and produce information. And so when there is a serious issue of national security or security on the streets, and you want to hear from MI5 or the security services in the Cobra room, that's where you can hear that. And the Prime Minister... So it won't be today the discussion, I wouldn't think, about policy. It will be the discussion about kind of what is happening and about information and understanding exactly what is going on and have we got the right resources. So the Cobra meeting, chaired by the Prime Minister, will be deciding today, is the government doing everything it can to back the security services and the police to tackle the kind of extremism and violence that we've all seen and that Zara has been urging more action on.
Yeah.
Well, look, great to talk to you this morning. We didn't get on to any other subjects or any joy in Olympics or any pleasure because this is so important, but good to hear all of your views this morning.